This is our second intergenerational dialogue. Our first intergenerational dialogue was held last year on the same day. Today's intergenerational dialogue, we are co-hosting it with the intergenerational, with the Presidential Climate Commission, and I mean the Youth Climate Champions Program, which is under the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project, which is a partnership between WWF, Institute of Economic Justice, as well as Climate Action Network South Africa, co-funded by European Union and CEDA. Apologies, my name is Hlengiwe Radebe. I'm a youth and civil society engagement officer at WWF. Welcome everyone. Apologies for not introducing myself. As I said, today's dialogue is between the Youth Climate Champions and the Presidential Climate Commission, and we are grateful that the Presidential Climate Commission could co-host this event with us. Today's theme is around youth and government for inclusive policy. It is a follow-up from last year's theme, which was beyond youth tokenism. So we are building up from last year's topic. On our agenda today, we have supporting message from our Commissioner Mbali Baduza, followed by our EU representative for opening remarks. Our third item on the agenda, which will be led by Mudiehi Mafatiri, is the launch of the youth position paper titled Exploring Meaningful Youth Engagement in South African Climate Policy. And this position paper is built on from last year's dialogue. Similarly with this year's theme, is that we hope to have a policy brief at the end, towards the end of this year, early next year, based on the discussions that we'll have today. After the launch of the position paper, we then have the main course of the meal that brought us all together, which will be our intergenerational dialogue, which will be facilitated, very excited about this, will be facilitated by Onke Ngcuka from Daily Maverick. So looking forward to that. That will be a discussion between young people and the youthful people. Yeah. Trying not to say old people. And then just after the intergenerational dialogue panel discussion, we have some exciting news to share from the Youth Climate Champions program. So please stay tuned for that. Please don't, for those online, please don't leave us. Please stay up until the end. And finally, we'll have closing from our youth commissioner, Ayaka Melitafa. So looking forward to that. So just as she walks in, and I apologize, because she hasn't got her breath, I would like to introduce our EU our EU representative to come and give welcome remarks.
Thank you very much. I give those remarks on, hello everybody. Sorry for keeping everyone up. So I'm giving these remarks on behalf of my ambassador, Her Excellency Ms. Sandra Kama, who couldn't be with us today. She wishes to convey greetings to everyone in attendance and to the Presidential Climate Commissioner that's with us as well, Musaya Kameditafa. A special greeting for you. So climate change is a critical and strategic area of collaboration for us as the EU in South Africa. While climate change looms large above us, it is encouraging that policymakers are taking notice of the urgency to deal with climate change. It is also vital that young people are involved in these discussions and decisions that will affect their future. I've just realized I'm no longer young, sorry. Okay, cool. We are hopeful that this intergenerational dialogue is a step towards more inclusive climate policy making. The European Union, represented by Sweden, and EU as partners of WWF, recognizes the importance of youth involvement in climate change policy. In 2013, the EU endorsed a youth strategy which acknowledges young people's role in decision-making processes, their potential to lead and make decisions, their contributions to society, and their desire for social and environmental justice. It recognizes the importance of engaging young people in all aspects of society, including climate change policy. Involving young people in climate change policy decisions is critical and should happen at all levels, from local to national to international. We are aware that WWF does this all too well. Through the capacitated and coordinated civil society organizations and Youth for Enhanced Climate Ambition, Action and Accountability, the CAP program. Yeah, it's a mouthful. EU grant and supported by Sweden. The presence of the representatives of SALGA here today, this joint venture with the Presidential Climate Commission and WWF's presence and active participation in the 2 last COPs is evidence of this. We as Team Europe are encouraged by the progress that has been made, and we're even more convinced that involving young people in decision-making processes and their perspectives will enrich the policymaking process. The EU's youth strategy recognizes this, stating that young people's participation can contribute significantly to policymaking quality, responsiveness, and relevance, and gives a voice to those who are most affected by the policy itself. Young people can contribute valuable knowledge and expertise, particularly around emerging sectors such as renewable energy and green jobs. And as the world faces the impact of climate change, it is essential to recognize the importance of young people as champions for climate change. In South Africa and Africa broadly, young people have a significant role to play in addressing the climate crisis, given that Africa has the youngest population in the world, with over 60% of the population under the age of 35, even bigger if we're extended to our definition of 35. The youth must speak out and advocate for their future. The youth also has the unique ability to bring fresh perspectives and innovative solutions to climate change challenges. They possess a unique set of skills such as creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving that can help address the complexities of the climate crisis in novel ways. They possess a unique perspective on sustainability, have the potential to mobilize collective action, and bring innovative solutions to address the climate crisis. In a means to further augment inclusive policymaking, the EU delegation has developed the Capacity Enhancement Dialogue and Recovery Program, CEDA, to support civil society to deepen meaningful engagement and enable CSOs to play a greater role in the development and dialogue with the South African government, with EU member states, and the EU delegation. This is a program of just over €7 million and has specific objectives to support initiatives which center youth and women. One of the key outputs of the CEDA program will be the establishment of a civil society sounding board representative of and inclusive of women and youth voices. I really hope some of you can participate in it. We are in the final stages of contracting, and the program should be fully operational by this time next year. For Team Europe, it is essential to empower and support young people to lead the way in all policymaking, and especially in climate action. We are very excited about this position paper that we are here to launch, and we are certain it will further guide us in this endeavor.
Thank you so much. Again, that was Musa from the European Union. I would like to then welcome our next speaker, our very own youth commissioner as well, who just joined recently, Bali Baduza. Thank you so much, PCC Youth Commissioner.
Afternoon, everybody. I am Bali Baduza, a civil society commissioner, but also a youth. I will start with a quote. I want to keep it short and simple, but let me start with a quote. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. That's a quote from Frantz Fanon. Nelson Mandela had a similar quote, and he said, "Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that generation." So to both activists and great thinkers who have since gone, as young climate activists, we have discovered our mission, climate justice, that addresses young people, that addresses the ills of young people, of a society that is traumatized, and one that centers vulnerability due to the harms of the past and the present. We are the generation that is great. There's no question about it. The Presidential Climate Commission is committed to meaningfully engaging with young people of this country, and us as young people make the majority of it. So we are the people of this country. This year alone, the PCC has launched a youth series, a youth essay series, and has consulted with young people through the energy dialogue, the electricity recommendations. Last week, a youth delegation attended the PCC commission meeting and presented on what we are doing, and it was electrifying. So Ayaka and I will endeavor to represent young people as best as we can with purpose, and we look forward to engaging with you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Talking about meaningful engagement from the PCC, the position paper that is going to be launched today speaks to that, how we as young people want to be meaningfully engaged in climate policy. So I'll hand over to Mudiehi as well as Fanny, and there's someone online. I'll allow Mudiehi to introduce them. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mudie Mafantiri. I'm an intern at the Climate Action Network South Africa and also project lead on the position paper, which is titled Exploring Meaningful Youth Engagement in South Africa. So today we are going to be launching the position paper. It will be made available publicly after this discussion. But unfortunately, due to the limited time we have, this is just a launch, and so we will not be taking questions and answers. We will, however, be having about 3 events unpacking this position paper, which provides everybody ample time to read the paper, to engage with what we are asking people to do, and to also provide us with feedback. So I'll hand over to Nath Masami, who is a team leader that has contributed to the position paper. She'll be presenting a few things, and then I'll hand over to our other team leader here in person, who will present further on the position paper. Thank you. Nathma, are you ready?
I'm ready, thank you. I will share my screen. Please let me know if everyone can see it.
Okay, currently we can't see it. Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, afternoon everyone. My name is Nathma. I'm a psychology graduate and research assistant at UNISA with a background in education provision. I thank everyone for the opportunity to present the proposition paper as a team leader on behalf of the Youth Climate Change Champion Bootcamp cohort of 2022. So I've just seen that my slides are a little bit unorganized, but they now are in order. And without further ado, let me begin. So I'd like to start off with my journey to the bootcamp. Before I even dive into it, I have to tell everyone that I am the worst person with directions. So naturally, before I even got started, I was already lost on my journey through climate change, and especially when it came to climate change policies. I was lost, but I was highly motivated. I was highly motivated to contribute to the growth of my community. And this motivation stemmed from 3 things. Firstly, I constantly saw the circular nature between climate change, psychological and physical well-being of youth and children in South Africa. I realized that I couldn't bring change in one system without impacting and being impacted by another. Secondly, I have a strong belief in the transformative power of climate literacy, and I had a strong desire to improve accessibility to education, especially climate education in particular. And lastly, I was curious about how research could be operationalized so that when we as the youth engaged in research, it did not become dormant, but it was actually used to empower future generations. In a nutshell, I was very motivated, but I was still very lost because I had no idea how to bring about any change. And that was when I came across the YCC bootcamp. When coming across the YCC bootcamp, the best thing and the first thing that happened was I met my fellow YCC members for the first time. And it was clear that we all shared the same passion for climate change. It was also clear that we were facing the same challenges. We had no idea where to go. We had no idea who to share our thoughts with or who to seek advice from. We needed designated spaces. When we had ideas and solutions, we struggled to find a roadmap that would help us implement them. We didn't have the resources, the knowledge, or the network. And when planning our journey through climate change, we didn't know what we would need or where we could get the relevant resources. So we really, really needed a guide. In conclusion, we were very, very lost, but fortunately, we were lost together. Moving on from that and coming back, together, we all went on this journey of discovery, and we were all empowered by change. And personally, I can attest to that myself. I can attest to the skills, the networks, and the experience I gained through engagement with the proposition paper that led to 3 highlights of 2023 for me. The first was I became the ambassador of ARC, African Resource Council, which aims to increase climate literacy in marginalized communities across Africa. This was largely due to the presentation, debating, and social media skills I acquired through the bootcamp with my fellow cohort members. This was then followed by me having the chance or the opportunity to put my newly acquired research and writing skills to the test that I gained through engagement with the proposition paper. And this led to me now being able to present my own research on climate anxiety as a Grow Your Own Timber member at UNISA in August. Lastly, one of the biggest highlights for me due to my engagement was that I started a new project, and this project is focused on the gamification and the creation of a climate literacy series for children. And it's inspired by the Cape Floral Kingdom, which will see characters from South Africa travel through our beautiful landscapes. But getting back to the proposition paper, in summary, I can say that as the youth, we went on a journey of confusion that would end. And then we also began another journey as we started to conclude that climate policies could not be ignored in our attempt to change our environments and our communities. Through discovery, we also continuously were inspired by the potential of climate policies and its ability to shape a reality that could echo our voices and create a better future for us all. As we collaborated and we continue to see this, as we collaborated, we continue to see the impact of climate policies on various aspects of our lives. Again, we were feeling very, very lost. We just knew that climate policies were shaping our realities, and we realized we needed a roadmap. And to create this roadmap, we needed the input of stakeholders that had knowledge and had resources to demystify climate policies and climate spaces. At the same time, we also realized we could provide insight that could improve the impact and drive the change needed to uplift our society. Through this discovery, we obviously came across a lot of barriers or roadblocks, which continuously appeared, the first being the structural and resource barriers. As youth, it was difficult to find spaces for climate policy discussion. This made it difficult to find guidance from existing policymakers and share our input. At the same time, we felt overwhelmed. On our own, we didn't have the resources needed to understand climate policy and actively engage in the process. Next up was the communication and networking barriers. Communication barriers took on many forms, from linguistic and jargon-laden barriers to the struggle to establish sustainable communication channels with stakeholders at different levels of policy development and implementation. This impacted us as the youth on a local level and internationally. We could not speak the language of policymaking. Consequently, we felt our voices were being stifled by policies, and we wanted to change this. Our last barrier, which also ironically had the power to unlock the youth potential in climate policy processes for generations to come, was the educational, training, and technological barrier. These barriers also occurred at different levels. At a primary school level, climate education had the unfulfilled potential to inspire young minds, encourage their curiosity, and provide them with role models from youth-led initiatives. Meanwhile, at a secondary level and tertiary education level, much focus was placed on academic preparation. The unintended side effect was the marginalization of policy processes. This marginalization often resulted from linguistic barriers, distance from networks and resources, and the training needed to meaningfully engage in public policy processes. Growing frustration due to a lack of understanding about policy processes were compounded by the impact of the technological divide often experienced in the global South. To overcome these barriers, we placed policymaking at the center of our strategies. Our strategies would target education, they would prioritize policy training and give people the spaces to network so they could share resources and knowledge. It was clear that motions to increase climate policy education in the national syllabus, as well as integrate it in educational institutions like universities and college, was necessary. Special attention and investment in policy processes within their own right needed urgent attention. This could be in the form of training that would equip youth to participate in policy spaces at different stages. Last, but certainly not least, youth and community resource centers needed to be established as policy education havens for generations to come. So what exactly was the desired outcome of the paper? At the end, we believed that the success of the proposition paper would result in greater support from policymakers. This would have a knock-on effect. Youth would be empowered to contribute and lead climate policy processes at a national and global level. A new standard would be set, and youth marginalism and tokenism could become a thing of the past. To dive a little bit deeper, we can look at how the materialization of the desired outcomes just mentioned would appear. For example, increased support from policymakers would mean that unique educational, linguistic, and cultural characteristics were considered as stakeholders co-created spaces with the youth through networks, collaboration, and training. This would water youth-led activism. Secondly, empowered youth leadership in policy processes would see the creation of cross-cutting civil society organizations. This means that multiple stakeholders, including the youth, policymakers, CSOs, and NGOs would all collaborate, strengthening their collective outcomes. Finally, a key finding from the paper revealed that youth were often only consulted at certain stages of policy development. The proposition paper aspires to have active engagement and input in the form of youth indicators of success, youth-led research and writing, as well as the formation of sustainable youth national climate councils. It is our hope that through the publication and dissemination of the proposition paper, the desired outcomes will be reached and ultimately result in climate policies that echo the voices of the youth, testify to the reality, and shape their sustainable futures. Finally, I would like to apologize for the long monologue and also conclude by thanking the multiple stakeholders that have made today a reality and given us as the youth an opportunity to voice our thoughts. In particular, the YCC Secretariat and all stakeholders in the climate ambition to accountability. And to my fellow youth climate change champions of 2022, I thank you for being lost with me in the beginning and going on a fantastic journey and paving a way for future generations and ourselves as we aimed to create a roadmap that could lead in future. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you for that presentation, Nathma. It was very comprehensive and you shared some very inspiring views. I'm going to now engage with Fanny Mia, who is our second team leader in the authors that wrote the position paper. So Fanny, please tell us a little bit about yourself. What inspired you to embark on this journey? And maybe you can share any unique things about your particular journey in climate action. So aside from telling us why you decided to join the writing team for the position paper.
Hello, everyone. And thank you. I want to say thank you first for being given this opportunity. I find that it is very vital. It is very vital that, like Nathma indicated a bit earlier on, that youth are actually given the opportunity and the platform to voice such issues, right? Again, my name is Fanny Mia. I come from the Free State originally, from home. I come from a former Bantustan, so yes, so that's how, yeah, I come from a former Bantustan. And what I can say really is that the situation back at home, in all honesty, is dire. It's further exacerbated by, of course, climate change, but then obviously we should not ignore the socio-economic things inherent in former Bantustans, right? So also I'm an anthropologist in the making, so that's my way of thinking. The study of humans and yeah, the study of humans across time and space. So the reason why I wanted to involve, rather, the reason why I wanted to get involved into this climate change space was because I found that South Africa is in a very interesting and very peculiar situation at this time, specifically with the just energy transition, because we are pioneers. If you do your research out there, we are the pioneers of the just energy transition. So my interest, possibly again, my research in the future will be on the focus of how we can use the just energy transition to empower local, or rather Bantustans and other the like communities that are similar to Bantustans. How can we use that to empower? How can we use the JET IP and the just energy transition itself to empower people, where also where we will also be like giving them information on what this really is about, not just no, the world is ending, okay, I sharp it someday, but then we have things that we can do now that can make these things, for example, heat waves, even the floods now as we speak, it's flooding somewhere. It don't just happen randomly, it's because of human activity. So when we educate people about certain things and how they can mobilize their communities and their respective disciplines as well, because I believe that climate change as a situation, as an umbrella term, requires what I'm coining a horizontal inspection of positionality. What do I mean by that? Which means you inspect grassroots level participation all the way to the very top, and how these people are actually contributing to making a change, because everybody is out there doing something. And as I stand here as a youth representative, I cannot fully comprehend the different levels these people are engaging with this thing. So yeah, yes.
Thank you for that, Fanny.
Thank you.
So the position paper outlines calls to action, and we would say this is one of the most important elements of the position paper.
Indeed.
Can you touch on a few calls to action?
Okay, the one that really caught my attention was education. As my colleague illustrated a bit earlier on, that if we really have a fighting chance at this thing, we better include the ones who are still at school, you know. We have to include them, make them actually know the truth, you know, not just the truth that the world is ending, but the truth of, okay, what can we do? You know, I mean, like, doom is out there and it scares us, but then what can we do? You know, at a very low level at education? What can they learn? Because these people can come up with very, very nice solutions at the end of the day, because again, they are not stupid. Young people are innovators, if not inventors of the future itself. So we need to educate those people, equip them sufficiently so that they can participate again within policy in effective ways, not just at the beginning, and then later on these people are nowhere to be found, and then you wonder what happened again. So again, we need to eradicate the disconnect between the older people and the younger people through this. Another one, the call to action that really caught my attention was the councils. And just to extrapolate on the council part, and just to put it under one umbrella thing, organizations, youth organizations. Again, I indicated earlier that I am an anthropologist in the making. So in one of my studies at school, I found that youth organizations have a way of empowering people because of what is called communitas. So communitas is when you build a community and it links people to something that is greater, something that's bigger than just themselves. So people are actually eager to go out there and make a change as a collective, which is very important. We need to collect young people, unify them, and turn them into one voice. Yeah.
Thank you, Fanny. Brilliant answer. So my last question
Yes.
for you.
Yes.
How will this position paper raise awareness and maybe connect the dots or bridge the gaps between youth and policymakers?
Can I just say that I strongly feel that this position paper is a start. It's definitely a start to something that can be bigger. So let's just take it as a starting point of the things that we are already doing and the recommendations that we have outlined in there, that, okay, we are doing this, but then you can help us with this and this to make our participation more effective. So that's what I think that position paper is really aimed at. It's a nice starting position of saying, this is what we have, this is how we plan to do things that we want to do, and how can you guys, as people who are already in the space, people who are key actors in the space, how can you help us help you and you help us? You know, it's also about that. Again, it's the point of this dialogue. We should have a dialogue with each other. There shouldn't be a disconnect where there's a person who feels like, because they're young, they don't know anything. Oh, because they're old, they can't think. No, we're all living on Earth. We're all living on Earth, and we just want to see it thrive. You know, I mean, like, Mother Earth is crying in my own perception. The floods right now, the heat waves, I still feel like there's still going to be more that's going to come. I just feel like we really need to come together and work together and save Mother Earth.
Thank you for that, Fanny. Thank you. I'm going to conclude now. And these will be my last words. So ultimately, what we're trying to achieve with the position paper is to continue the conversation, which many youth have been having before us, right? To continue the conversation on how to engage youth meaningfully within climate policy processes. And really, I would love for everybody to actually read the position paper. A lot of people have put effort into it. And I would like to thank my fellow colleagues at the YCC Secretariat. Thank you for dealing with an unsurmountable WhatsApps and emails from me, and for your support in making this happen. I think we've done a great job. I'm very proud of the work that you have done, Fanny and Nathma. Obviously, there would be no position paper without you taking it amongst yourselves to lead your fellow bootcamp participants to write this publication. So I hope that we have more publications like this, and wish you all the best in your careers. Thank you.
Apologies. So I was sitting, and I was hearing a lot of yes, yes. So I'm hoping online as well that you are going as well and saying yes, we agree with the points that have been made. But I'm really sad that we can't deep dive into the position paper now, because it seems like there's a lot to speak about. But my team members that are online are going to share the link to the position paper for those online. For those who are in person, we will send you the email and send you the link to the position paper. The events, as Mo Mujeki said, we'll have follow-up events that will deep dive into the position paper, and these events are most likely going to be next month in July. So please keep a lookout for those events, and hope that you will join us. And we are putting it out there to also, if there are any government officials joining us online or here in person, Deepak, to say, please come and engage with us in deep diving the position paper and as we present it to you. As the next speakers prepare themselves, and others are going to be joining us online, and then the others are going to be joining us here in person. I just wanted to just share a map of what the process of the position paper. So last year, June 15, we had the intergenerational dialogue that looked at the beyond tokenism. In October, we had the youth bootcamp, which had 35 young people participate. We hosted it in Gauteng for 5 days. And from those youth participants, we then said, it was decided, the participants, they said, let's write a position paper. So the youth participants then decided to put together a position paper led by Mutieke, supported by Ivana. And so that process has been going on up until now, and as the position paper has been finalized. Again, we hope that this year's theme is going to lead into a publication of some sort that will be again presented to you again next year when you host our next intergenerational dialogue. So thank you so much, and thank you Mo, thank you Fanny, and thank you Natma for launching the position paper, and we look forward to reading it. So to our next session, which we've all been looking forward to, is our intergenerational dialogue with the theme focused on youth and government for climate, for inclusive policy. I would like to hand over to our facilitator of today, Onke Ngcuka from the Daily Maverick. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Deepak. Hello, can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody, and so great to see so many of you here and online. My name is Onke Ngcuka. I am a climate and environment. The Daily Maverick, writing specifically for the Our Burning Planet, and a lot of my work, I think, engages with climate justice and various other themes under that umbrella. And I think within exploring that theme, engaging the youth is a very important part of it, because they're really at the forefront and have really taken initiative to drive the climate crisis movement and environmental movement forward. And I'm so glad that we have this dialogue with everyone here, particularly before Youth Day, because I think that previously the youth of 1976 were quite brave and also took initiative. And I think we see some of those similarities with the current youth activists. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So as I was saying, it's very important that this happened before Youth Day, because we're seeing a lot of similarities with the youth of the past and the current youth. And I'm also very glad that the Coalition of Organizations has made this initiative intergenerational, because we've seen the youth previously kind of either pushing back against the current youth, and some of them also being partners to the current youth. So I'm very excited to hear what both sides of these generations have to say today. And I'm going to start the conversation by asking Tandile Chinyavanyo, is she online? Tandile, are you with us?
Hi, I'm here.
Okay. Tandile Chinyavanyo is a climate and energy campaigner at Greenpeace Africa. Tandile, you and I have engaged quite a bit on previous stories that I've worked on, speaking about climate justice and injustice, and the role of youth within this movement. And I think I want to kick off this dialogue by asking you about the role that the youth have played when it comes to the climate crisis policy and addressing climate injustices. What have your experiences been, and what have the youth done to shift climate crisis policy?
Thank you so much. Apologies, I'm unable to turn my camera on. But I think it's quite an important question, and it's one which we can say that there's been a substantial contribution from the youth in terms of guiding the conversation, especially around policy in the climate space. The youth have carved out a space for themselves, particularly in spaces that ordinarily may not have been receptive or hospitable to young people in this space. And we've seen that a lot of youth have moved into these spaces and really driven home the message about how important it is that they are present in these spaces, particularly considering that the people that are most of the time decision makers and have the power in these spaces will likely not be here to witness the ramifications of the climate crisis unfolding. And so there's been like a really great effort from the youth to participate in these platforms that are made available, to make sure that their opinions are heard and to ensure that they are attending these conferences, whether global, locally, and ensuring that the youth's voice are made present in these areas. I think there's still a lot more that we can do and a lot more longer to go, but we need to see a lot more of our government as well, recognizing the initiative of the youth and creating more platforms as we've seen them creating over the past couple of years to ensure that the youth can engage on these issues.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that that presence of the youth is growing and your voices are being heard. And I want to follow up by asking, how does the participation of the youth go beyond tokenism when you come to the table and try and participate in informing climate crisis policy? Would you say it's tokenism? Has it grown beyond that? And if you could give us a few examples as well, that would be very much appreciated.
I think in a sense it has grown beyond that, but there's still a risk for that to occur. I think Natma spoke quite eloquently towards it, especially around the issues around language barriers and how it can be difficult for the youth, especially to engage on the issues of language that the policymakers use. And this is further exacerbated when we just consider the literacy rates in our country and how even the language of instruction is an additional barrier for the youth. And now we wish to convey very complex ideas in a multitude of languages. So it's very important that our government also ensure that in these communications that are being put out, that they're clear and easy to understand, but also that they're communicated in a variety of languages, particularly the vernacular languages of South Africa, to ensure that engagement is not just limited to a select few that are privileged enough and have the social capital to enter those spaces, but that all of the youth are able to engage on these issues, and that there's a broad-based engagement, not on just climate issues, but social issues that are affecting us, particularly unemployment, gender-based violence. So for us to really say that we've moved beyond that point of tokenism, we need to see a lot more a concerted effort to ensure broad-based communication, broad-based meaningful participation, and we need to ensure that this is done in an inclusive manner.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Thandile, for that. I'm going to jump over to Deepak Patel on my left here, who is the head of climate finance and innovation at the PCC. Deepak, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to kind of leapfrog off of what Thandile has just said on the importance of expanding and ensuring inclusivity when engaging the youth at a policy level. I want to kind of hear from you on how you've actually done this, how this has improved over the years, and what steps you've taken to improve the participation of youth at a climate policy level, particularly within your space of climate finance and innovation.
Thank you very much, Onke. there's a part of me that is going to be misbehaving and say a few things without addressing the question you've asked. And I'm going to blame the youthful part of me for
we'll
doing
hold you
that.
accountable, don't worry.
I think at the outset, we need to say and really believe that youth are part of society. So it's not as if, you know, youth are a different species to the rest of humanity. And I know that that might sound trite, or it might sound obvious, but it's a point that needs to be made. You yourself referred to the role that a generation of youth in 1976, around this time, played. And I also want to say that the deputy chair at the last PCC meeting, although he was a bit strident, and these days is older himself, made the point that South Africa has been endowed with youth being a leading force for change in South Africa's history, and we must never forget that. And that is where we come from. So not to blow trumpet or personalize it, I myself, for example, was a Section 29 detainee and charged in the High Court for terrorism at the age of 26. Now, to have experienced that by the age of 26, you can imagine the ages of 18 to 26 were particularly not difficult, but exciting years, as we found as young people a voice and gave expression to that voice. Of course, as the political system in South Africa stabilized post-1994, we have to ask ourselves the question, did we find that the space for youth activism and youth participation, did that space improve or did it close down? Now, I belong to a group of people who believe that perhaps in 1994 what happened was that because we had democracy being ushered in, all non-governmental forms of participation somehow began to get curtailed. So it wasn't only based on age, it was also based on, in my view, at that time, a demobilization that happened because of political process of even our NGO and our civil society sector. And so to your question more directly, the PCC has been very aware from the very beginning that if we are to talk about broader societal participation, we were not only talking about the sectors that made up the social compact partners, but we were also talking about a cross-section of society, in this case, young people who needed to be affirmed and given a role to play. But I must say that while we've created the space for that, we do not, as the PCC, believe that the PCC holds the monopoly on ideas. And so the way in which we've always sought to engage with the youth sector, for want of a better word, or the younger part of society, is to be encouraging of dissent, encouraging of a variety of different viewpoints, and engaging, sometimes critically and sometimes combatively, but hopefully always constructively, with the intention of generating amongst young people who will be adults tomorrow, by the way, like me, old, and ensure that through that process, what we do is have a generational pull of people who are passionate, people who are courageous, and people who, inside as well as outside of the system, have a keen understanding of how society is structured, where the levers of power are, what the system looks like, and what the system change needs to look like behind a very clear understanding of what is the theory of change. Now this, while we were lucky as young people to be confined to the borders of South Africa because it was an anti-apartheid struggle, it's much more complex today because the global agenda calls for action, change, transformation, hopefully not just lip service reform, fundamental transformation of the global system across the board. And it is in this context that I think for South Africa, with respect to our climate change response, there needs to be an understanding on the part of the youth that we act locally, but always with our eye on what the global outcomes should be.
Hello, you guys hear? Yeah. Thank you so much for that informative answer. And so you were a rebel in your youth, and then you are a rebel now, and I love the continuity of that. And I want to speak to a little bit about the youth movement, because I think from your age group, now, you were quite rebellious, and I think we're seeing that with the current youth, where they feeling that they have to be rebellious because your age group, who were rebellious in their time and in their youth, are not quite receiving the urgency and the demands that the youth are calling for at a policy level. So demanding, for example, a more rapid just energy transition plan, a more addressing climate injustice, demanding, climate financing. And I think a lot of the pushback is answered with, the answer from the pushback is, well, you guys are too young, you don't understand how these systems work. Can you expand for our audience where that sort of response comes from, and is it fair when the youth are demanding for very important change and trying to inform justice, and you guys have that experience and you know that struggle, to respond in that way to them when they really just want to shift policy for the better?
There's no easy answer to your question. The importance of having the older people have a not youthful orientation, but a change-orientated orientation is critical. And maybe as we've formalized our systems of policy and government, we've lost the ability to take the voice of outside the system, or voices from outside the system, effectively and sincerely into account. So I think we might have lost that capability, which results then perhaps in youth having to be a little more agitating, boisterous, and militant. We need to, as youth, and I'm going to include myself in your group for now, even honorarily, we need to find where the points of leverage are, so that we apply ourselves on principle firstly, but strategically and tactically. From our side in the PCC, we will not shut down the voice of the youth. The PCC itself is not a structure of government per se. It is in existence. People in this audience might remember, it is in existence because of the outcome of the Job Summit in 2018, which saw that the South African transition and climate response needed to be sensitive to the fact that all of society in South Africa have a multitude of problems, which we need to resolve in the course of walking the climate change journey. What I have seen personally in engaging with some of the younger people on the issues of climate in the last 2 years or so is that there is now an appreciation that it is not just a call to save the whales. It is not just a call to be environmental and green. It is about finding the pathways that achieves those things while at the same time achieving the outcomes that we need as a society in South Africa if people generally are going to be prosperous and their lives are going to improve. The other point I wanted to make is that we always, even in the revolutionary movement, had this debate, who leads? And the leadership is not only based on age, it is also based on this notion of, and I'm going to use old terms now, who is the intelligentsia and who is the people? And I think youth or young people themselves must go through that discussion amongst themselves and realize that in South Africa, it is not only the young people who have the intellectual as well as the resource capability to have these debates, but they also carry a responsibility. to mobilize, organize, and carry the rest of the young society in South Africa together with us into the transition. I'm going to say something not so controversial, it's a matter of fact. If we take demographics in South Africa, if young people, and I'm not one who likes to use the 35-year-old cutoff, I'm sorry. I don't have an age in mind, but 35 in my mind is not quite youth. I mean, young, yes, youth, not. Okay, but if you take the demographics of South Africa and just say young people between the ages of 18 and 28, if they were effectively mobilized and organized, they could make a difference as to what the nature of our political representation is. And that system exists today. And so when I talk about a theory of change, I'm talking about an all-encompassing understanding of what the power of organized young people or youth could be, and how they could actually shape, influence, and control the narrative and the outcomes of all of our representative processes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Deepak, for that. I'm going to turn over to Kopano Moraka, Digital Strategy Lead at Hlengiwe Energy. Kopano, you have been in the climate space for quite some time, engaging at various levels. I'm first going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your role in this space, but also tell us a little bit about how you've seen climate policy shift over the years since you started participating in this space.
Thank you so much, Onke. I think my participation into the climate space has started when I joined Youth at SAYA and the Young Youth Policy Committee. And from there on, we've been able to just, draft, establish, and edit youth statements, which we've handed over to ministerial officials, the PCC, DFFE, and over the years that has turned into the COP27 statement, the COP26 statement, Young Leaders Declaration statement, and these are just the biggest one being the SAYCAP, which is the South African Youth Climate Action Plan. And these have just been steps that have kind of built and contributed to the youth policy space. And I think from my experience, what I've seen is there's been more consultations, of course, but I think there's also just been a barrier in terms of bridging the digital divide, the data to get young people involved, the transport assistance to actually get young people involved, even in panel discussions. Young people within the community being included in the panel discussions to speak on the issues that consultations are being held on, are being elaborated on. So those are just a couple of the things that I've also seen shift into the narrative, and I think it's young people are growing the momentum of wanting to see change alongside with the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. And I think it's no longer just about issues that affect us now, but we're thinking of future generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you tell us maybe a little bit about some of I don't know, maybe 3, 4 core calls that the youth are begging organizations such as the PCC to act on, or various other government entities?
I think one thing is we're calling for inclusion in policymaking spaces, right? Not just on a tokenistic level. We're calling for being included in the implementation stages of those processes. The second thing also I think we're calling onto is to understand the negotiation processes, to be involved in the negotiation processes. Right now, the Bond Conference is taking place, and how many of young people are actually involved and understand the processes of what happens leading up to COPs. Yes, and I think I had the third one in mind, but I think I'm going to touch on those 2 for now, and then if the third one will come into mind, and then I'll just get on into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and I just want to follow up on that.
Yeah.
When you go to these global conferences, and there's so many countries, and you know, they boast that the youth are invited to these platforms.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a journalist and I write about, you know, some of the stuff, and I trying to scrutinize the policy documents. And honestly, I struggle. I have my list of contacts that I constantly have to go back and forth to break everything down for me. Tell me a little bit about the challenges of being in those spaces, but not the discussions not being accessible to you, and how would you like, specifically in the context of South Africa, how would you like to see that change in order for the youth to meaningfully participate to influence and inform climate policy?
You've actually just saved me, because the third one was alluding to that actually. It was, you know, a language barrier. The jargon is so heavy. And for someone in high school to expect someone in high school to kind of get involved in the climate space. I mean, we learn about global warming from, you know, preschool, you know, high school, but there comes a point where you have to ask yourself what desalination means, and those are words that, you know, are quite complex for a young person. So I think bridging that gap would kind of, I think these are the solutions that I think I would propose, would be maybe to establish a youth envoy, right, which would be predominantly independent, and would serve as a bridge between government and, you know, negotiations, to actually offer young people the opportunity to attend these negotiations with the understanding within that sector, right? And then I think it also calls for meaningful and colorful discussions also, because you're not just limited to representing your country when you are in these platforms. Also, I think having live feedback sessions during, you know, the briefing before, during, and after, to, you know, hold stakeholder engagement such as this, to tell young people, this is what we're going to achieve when we are in these conferences. This is exactly, you know, what we've set out to achieve, and these are the challenges that we as a delegation are facing. And after that, what are the statements that have been agreed upon, and what are the next steps that follow up into that? And then I think leading up to, you know, that would be going into education reform. I don't know to what scale, but I've been looking into maybe having climate handbooks, for example, or including climate projects or environmental projects within social sciences, or having a climate action class, for example. That could be something that could help in capacitating youth to understand the terms and, you know, the language of the jargon that is being discussed within the climate space. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think from what you've said, I think that the municipality has a very important role to play, because they are the go-to between, you know, government and the people on the ground.
Civil society.
Absolutely. And with us, we've got Dora Marema, who is the head municipal sustainability portfolio head at the South African Local Government Association. Dora, sister, are you with us?
Yes, I am here. Good afternoon.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. As I was just saying, you play a very important role in bridging the gap between what government has to, you know, to say to the youth, or how government involves the youth in the role that they play in informing climate policy. And I wanted to get a sense from you of the role of municipalities in making space for youth engagement, as well as where the successes have been, and what the challenges have been as well in that space.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And I must also apologize for not being able to be there physically. I am having a clashing event that session I had to attend internally. So municipalities, I think you have articulated correctly that there are that sphere of government that is closest to the people. And it means how they engage with the youth is going to be very critical in terms of bringing in their perspective and that voice. And I think to be able to frame the role of local government and the capacity that local government has got, one has to look at, you know, broadly in terms of how local government is doing. You know, there are some examples, I think, of the work that has been done. I think, you know, municipalities, and, you know, to a varying degree, have got what is called the special programs units that are led by a mayoral member committee who looks after that. And depending on a category of a municipality and the size, you will find someone called a youth development coordinator in there, whose role is really to coordinate all the youth-related issues. And within the same unit, you'll find someone who coordinates work with the women and people with disabilities, and that is their structure. So obviously in smaller municipalities, you might find one person who deals with all of those. In a bigger metro, in a secondary city, you might find a little bit more capacity when one person who deals with issues of the youth. And I think then the challenge is always to make sure that because you have a different department that would deal with issues of climate change, which is the department that deals with issues of environment, what you need is that level of integration to make sure that these two departments or these two units are actually talking to one another. And issues of climate change are still fairly, fairly, I can say, a little bit new within municipalities. They are obviously part of the broader environmental mandate of the municipality. Obviously, we are awaiting the bill that is going to assist us. We have seen, I myself have seen some work being done by the City of Johannesburg when they developed their climate action plan. And I'm not sure that's where I met Kopano during the launch. And in my view, they did something that I believe we could be able to learn from, where they engaged the youth, and the youth were part of the of a group that really made inputs from what I believe within the climate action plan of the city. And I think they had sessions that were engaging the youth. And I think that's something that we are going to be able to have to learn from, to bring the voice of the youth within how municipalities are going to respond to the issues of climate change. There is an opportunity that comes with the climate change bill, which will become an act very soon. And that spells out that municipalities have to develop these climate action plans and review them every 5 years. And in my view, I believe that that is a very, very important opportunity for the municipalities to really make sure that the voices of the citizens, particularly of the young people whom we believe are the ones who will be affected the most, because many of us, the older people, probably might not be there, and it's important to bring the voices of the future, of those that will be there when probably none of us who are policymakers won't be there. So I think it's exciting. It's exciting also to see the work, because a lot of the cities are being supported by C40 cities, and I work closely with them, and they are very big on making sure that all of society, particularly the issues around the youth, are actually being brought on board as they work with the cities to develop their climate action plans. So yeah, I think you have articulated correctly. Local government plays a big role. How municipalities respond and what they do is going to set the tone in terms of how the whole country is going to respond, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Doria, for that explanation. And you mentioned the climate change bill. We've been waiting quite a while for that one. So I'm very excited that you're mentioning it and talking about how the youth are going to be involved. But I would like you to expand on how the youth are going to be involved at every single stage and level of bringing this climate change bill together, particularly at a municipal level, and how that's going to play out. So if you could maybe expand a little bit on that, so that we understand exactly what you mean when you say that there is a space for youth to engage with the municipality.
The work that SALGA does right now is really just to build the capacity of municipalities to be able to conduct, or to conduct the climate risk and vulnerability assessments, to compile their greenhouse gas inventories that will inform their climate action plans. And what we are, I think, is really we see it as an opportunity, in that as they are beginning to actually delve into this and putting together, because many of them do not have this information. They are yet to be able to compile this, that there is an opportunity for them to bring in the whole of society, because we have seen how developing policies or even action plans or disaster management plans that do not involve the citizens, it doesn't really help, because people are not well informed. People do not know what the plans of the municipality are all about. So we are encouraging municipalities to actually include the third leg of local government, because you've got the political leg, and you've got the administrative leg of local government, and then you've got the community leg, which is the people themselves. And I believe that you will have to have a two-way, where the young people within the communities will have to organize themselves to be able to reach out to their municipality and say, what are you doing about this? And then at the same time, another level would be a responsibility of the municipality to make sure that it bringing in the voices of those people that within their own jurisdiction, to firstly understand their vulnerabilities, but also to work with them to develop the responses in terms of how are the youth seeing at the municipality responding to some of the vulnerabilities that have been indicated, even putting together, helping to put together the vulnerabilities. Because when you do that, you are building capacity of the community to be able to be resilient. We have witnessed a lot of extreme climate events. And usually when you have a paper in place, like a disaster management plan, it won't translate into action. If the people have not been involved in putting it together to understand their vulnerabilities, that in our area, we have a river that runs in this, and if there are heavy rainfalls, that we face this likelihood of being flooded, then you really won't have the time and the chance at the time. So we are encouraging municipalities to be proactive and to bringing in all the voices on board as they are developing this climate action plans, to make them real, to really ground them and to give them life. And for me, the youth are really a critical part of that, not only in terms of being consulted, but actually listening to them in terms of what are some of the innovative ways in which we could start building capacity of our own communities when it comes to climate change, and all the vulnerabilities that are already existing. There are innovative ways that probably people like myself who've been around the corner might not have thought about. But the young people are exploring the artificial intelligence. They are exploring other avenues that many of us are actually not thinking about. And I think it's important for us, as we build the capacity and support municipalities, to embark on this work, to insist and to encourage them to bring in the voice of the young people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving us such a realistic picture of how the youth can be involved, and as well as the role of the municipality in all of this. We've also got with us, you spoke, Mam Dora, about innovation, and I want to bring in Dr. Henry Roman, sitting right in front, who joins us as the Director for Environmental Services and Technologies at the Department of Science and Innovation. Dr. Henry, you're currently working on a circular economy strategy. You've worked with water and within the water and waste sector. You've also worked within the green economy. That's a very impressive CV. But I think I'm more interested to hear what role the youth can play in some of the work that you do with the department. Is there space for them to engage in a meaningful way? And has that happened yet?
Thank you. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that. And good afternoon, everybody, and apologies for arriving a bit late. So our department works mainly with postgraduates, masters, PhDs, postdocs, and researchers across the country. And by definition, then your masters and postdocs fall in that category of youth. So we have programs designed around that, but we also have recently put in place entrepreneurship programs at grassroots level to reach out to the youth that are not part of that academic circle, because we're missing good innovations, because we're not reaching the townships, we're not reaching the rural parts of the country by only engaging at that level. So we've realized that. Took us 20 years, but we realized that, and we've reached out. And I think, having been in youth movements in the past. I think these declarations and statements, the UN loves these things, but we need to be a bit more, we have to find ways of holding them to account, because the youth come up with really innovative approaches and declarations that make a lot of sense, but nobody holds the organizations to whom we present these things to account. And I think maybe this is something for the PCC to think about, is how do you create a platform where there's a lot more meaningful engagement and the youth can actually hold us older folk to account? Because there's a lot we nod our heads for, and we say, yes, it's great, you've written a lovely document, but nothing is actioned out of that declaration or statement. And that is where I think the youth are not having a meaningful contribution, because they're lending their intellect and their time and their effort to drafting these things, but it's not taken forward. And on the innovation side, there's a lot that can be done. South Africa, like you've said all the things I do, so I won't repeat them, is embarking on the circular economy journey that the rest of the world is also embarking on. And the rest of the world is also trying to figure out, what does this mean? The reason we're looking at it is, in terms of climate mitigation, adaptation, a circular approach to economic activities is maybe, I'm not saying it is, it may be more inclusive, but it may also take us to answering the SDGs, to answering the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions of South Africa to the Paris Agreement. In mitigating those emissions, it may be the way that it can be done, but it has to be done as a whole economy approach. It's not something you do in the corner, and it's not something you do as a company so that you feel good and write a nice sustainability report to the JSE, but it's something you do because it makes business sense, and you're making profits and people are benefiting out of it. We must never forget, in our country, our informal economy contributes to a large degree to our levels of recycling in this country, which are amongst the highest in the world, believe it or not. The countries where PET, these water bottles, are recycled at a rate of 3%. In developed countries, in South Africa, it's 63%, around that number. And that's largely due to an informal economy. So we have to work at, how do we become inclusive? How do we integrate an informal economy into a formal economy and reduce that Gini coefficient, which we have the worst reputation when it comes to that on the globe, because the levels of difference between the rich and the poor are enormous in South Africa. And if you look at our per capita GDP, if we're measuring GDP as the measure or the metric, it looks good per capita. It makes us a middle income country. I challenge you to take a walk just up this road and you'll see the taxi rank up the road. That's not a middle income country. When you've walked just that short distance, it shows you the disparity already. Not to mention the Santon and Alex example that's used all the time. But all the visitors come to Joburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, and they see a first world city. They don't go out there into the rural parts of South Africa where they see a developing economy and not a third and not a middle income country. So that's the disparities we're dealing with. And I see climate change as an opportunity for us to potentially address the inequality, and the youth, which make up 50% of the African population on the continent, roughly, are the answer. So we need to find ways and instruments that allow them access to the economic development that we require as a country as well. That's just my thinking at this time.
Absolutely. And to follow up on what you've said right at the end, that are we allowing the youth to engage meaningfully? You've just said that your department came late to the party, but are now including the youth, within that space. I mean, you have them there, but I think what I want to ask is, are they engaging meaningfully when it comes to, you know, in informing policies around, for example, the circular economy, or formalizing the informal sector around recycling. Are they coming to the table when it comes to such discussions, or are they only taking direction from the top and just being trusted to implement what they're being told?
That's an interesting question, and my personal experience is they don't come to the table easily. You have to create a platform almost to allow them in. It's like they're almost afraid to come to the table. And that could be due to the fact that they ignored, or their inputs are not largely taken seriously. So that's why I say we need to create some sort of platform to allow for meaningful engagement. Like for us, when we call a meeting if I call a meeting tomorrow to talk about the circular economy, I can guarantee you without hesitation, there's no one in that room under 40. And that's as much as me reaching out to a network that I have as broadly as I can. It doesn't extend enough into those areas where I can get those useful voices. So I've done 2 roadmaps for the country already. And I even had church groups coming to the meeting, but I never had youth groups coming to the meeting. And I've engaged with one youth group I do engage with is the young water professionals of South Africa, which are young engineers, water scientists, etc., who are up and coming. Some are still at university, some are already working. There's a platform for the water sector for meaningful engagement of young people coming in and giving their inputs. I have to also just be honest, in recent years, it's kind of tapered off a little bit. I don't see them as much as I used to see them before. But for me, it's I'll just make it personal. How do I reach out and find, because I've got programs with youth for entrepreneurship, like I said, where it's only open to the youth. There's nobody older than 35 allowed. So they're there, and when I'm on these forums with them, we talk about these things. But when I go to a climate change meeting, and it's unfortunate, and I think one of the things we as a country need to think about is perhaps mentoring systems, proper mentoring, where young people are brought into government departments, brought into the municipalities, brought into businesses, and they are mentored by the leaders in those different areas. And they are taken to these meetings, because the only way to learn the jargon, to learn the policies, the processes, is by being in the room. You don't learn it from reading books. It doesn't help you. When you walk into the room, you'll notice the dynamic's not the same as what you were taught in the books. It's different. But yeah.
I mean, Kopano mentioned earlier that, in fact, we should be changing the language that is being used. So would you not maybe suggest that we change the language that is being used, instead of making sure that the youth understand the jargon that is being used? Because I think if you change the language, then you make the space more inclusive and you invite more people, as opposed to continuously perpetuating the same language and jargon barriers.
So 2 parts to that. The one part is, yes, you change the language to be more inclusive, and that's a good thing, because we as a society in South Africa, education levels are varied. So we need a way to speak to everybody. However, when you walk into a COP meeting and you don't speak their language, they don't pay attention to you. So that's the other thing. On these international platforms, there's a manner of discourse. And that's the manner in which things are done, that unfortunately you have to learn that. But you also have to learn to translate that into language that everybody understands. And I think that's the trick. There are not many translators in any system. There are very few people that translate science into English, that translate policy into English. As you said, you read these documents and you get lost off. I still get lost myself, and I'm supposed to be a policy maker. So yeah, so I think there are those 2 areas, but I think the more we can make the public aware of the issues that's at play and the opportunities it presents. And I think that's the thing we don't do. The media tend to focus on the negative a lot of the time, because that gives you the headline. But sometimes the opportunity that same headline will present to somebody with an innovative mindset, that's also what we need to try and find a way of bringing across.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, please.
This issue of language and jargon, and I'm going to use an anecdote. So I'm very new, relatively speaking, to the issues of climate. I've had a career in finance, but that wasn't orientated towards climate finance for many, many decades, actually, not just years. And so my first COP was COP26. And I'm going to tell a little story. I was terrified because I was not part of the government negotiating team. I was there on the sidelines in the blue zone of COP. Those who have been at COP know what I'm talking about. And I had no idea that I wasn't part of the negotiations. I was thrown into this system with a view to making an impact. And even as an older person, I had no idea where to go. And at that time, it was someone called Nyoka Naidu, who met me at the gate, showed me through security, showed me where to get the badge, and then took me on a tour of the blue zone. And then, thanks to her, because I wouldn't have dared myself, we snuck into the negotiating area, hoping no one would look at the color of our badges. Okay, and that was my baptism. It wasn't just jargon, it was a total system that has its rules, regulations, its corridors, its doors, its security, and you need to find a way, create a way of busting through. So I'm just going to leave that there. And then say that, you know, this issue of young people, and I'm going to repeat this, young people are young people at a particular stage in their lives. And at the end of the day, individually and collectively, young people end up being older, look at me, and they end up looking back on their lives, their career, and their experiences in life, and either feeling fulfilled or not fulfilled. And the reality, I'm afraid, in South Africa, is that we used to say we have 2 generations of lost youth. Those lost youth over the 3rd generation have become lost adults. And so there's a blend of individual progress for people who have the capacity, who have the resources, who sometimes have just the sheer lack of opportunity. And for those people who choose to be involved in climate, I want to say that as the PCC, we will encourage and create the conditions where you find a lifetime of expression with respect to climate change. But we also, as the PCC, involve other parties. So we've convened roundtables of young people, professionals in business. I've convened some young people just from a personal point of view in finance. And it is this ability to have young people express themselves wherever in the social, economic, and political system they find themselves in a constructive but hopefully transformative manner. And I know I keep harping on this. The critical challenge in South Africa is going to be how we find a socio-economic path that is climate responsible or climate responsive, that creates basic opportunities for the majority of youth as well as working age people who find themselves completely marginalized. And so to bring in the marginalized might require some degree of high-level socioeconomic policy. To bring in youth who have the capacity, the passion, the courage is something that needs to be interpersonal. Institutions need to learn how to create the space, open the doors, not co-opt, but in fact, open the doors to positive inclusion of younger people, which will then allow real intergenerational, for want of a better word, succession, rather than just an intergenerational dialogue.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Jump into that a bit. I think touching on youthful expressions as well, and just being fulfilled as a young person making change in in the world. I think the one thing that I would be proud of at Khanza that we're doing is kind of going about the series of highlighting young people. We're calling it the Young Basotho Spotlight series, and this is essentially we're starting a movement that highlights young people in the change-making space, whether it be the energy space, renewable energy, climate and environmental space, to kind of propel, because very often there's no media houses that kind of highlight the good work that young people are doing on the ground, and you don't necessarily need to be in high-level negotiations on an international level to be recognized. And I think that's just something that we are proud of, to be actually, driving the movement in the Lesotho Highlands, region, especially because Lesotho is such an LDC, country, and we don't have a lot of capacity for that. So I think that's just some of the good work that we're also doing to kind of add on to the building that community, and especially taking advantage of what social media does in the climate space. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you both for jumping in there. We do have one more panelist, and I haven't forgotten about him. Mike, are you with us?
Hi, Onke. Yes, I'm with you.
Hi, Mike. I promise I haven't forgotten about you. Mike is the senior manager at WESA, which is the Wildlife and Environment Society of South Africa. Mike, you've been in the space for quite a while, and you do some of the work I think that Deepak mentioned in terms of bridging the social gap. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, but and expand also particularly on how you've seen youth engagement at a policy level grow over the years?
Yeah, hi, Onke. Good afternoon, everyone. First off, I'm not sure if senior manager is referring to my age. I am the most senior manager, I think, at WESA now. However, my actual position is strategic lead, coastal provinces and youth. So I quite enjoyed seeing senior manager. So Onke, I think a number of really important points have come through from the welcome speech. And one of the comments in the welcome speech was the speaker, and I apologize, I didn't get your name, that you're no longer young. And it made me think of a quote that, over the last 20 plus years that I've worked in the youth space, I find really relevant. And it's like the goal in life is to die young, as old as you can. And when we start applying that kind of mindset, the importance of the intergenerational connection starts to come through. And there's been a lot of reflections around the value of intergenerational, and I really liked the way it was positioned, where it's not different generations trying to chase an agenda as separate entities, but this notion of succession. I think it's a really wise way to look at how we look at the climate crisis, or how we look at climate education, how we look at the transition. I know we use the word a just transition. I'm still struggling with what is the exact definition to just. But yeah, as WESA, when we take on the climate crisis, we're also aware that, and we need to be cognizant of having a specific lens that does look at youth and how youth play an important role within the climate environment, climate discussions. One of the big components we're grappling with at the moment is that we want youth to be active players in the climate discussion, in climate policy, and yet we're really only starting with youth when they become school leavers in terms of how they come into that space. So there's a huge deficit within the school environment to start being more specific around how does one engage meaningfully in policy. And yes, there's an increase, I guess, in kind of advocacy skills in a way, where campaigning around environmental issues is starting to become important in schools. And we're teaching that as a skill. How do you campaign? How do you become a stronger advocate behind a cause you truly believe in? So it starts to feed into the discussion around youth and climate policy, but we can definitely be a lot stronger in preparing young South Africans to grow and to continually amplify their voice on a trajectory instead of leaving school, and then civil society is investing huge time into trying to build capacity of youth to engage in the policy space. And we've missed an opportunity of it being more ingrained in terms of who we are, how we think, how we communicate, what we want to engage in. So that's a space where WESA is applying itself and is very aware. South Africa and beyond South Africa, we need to be thinking. Then I'm just going to jump to, there's a lot of other stuff happening around, the importance of youth perspectives, building capacity of youth. But I want to jump, just for time's sake, into the importance of young South Africans having opportunities to be more globally exposed. So this notion of global citizens, of getting young South Africans to engage meaningfully within the environmental and the climate space. I'm not sure you can separate them. The climate space, because we don't have a localized issue that we're trying to deal with. We have a global issue. It's more like the pandemic than it is around South Africa's current water quality of our oceans at the metropolitans. So unless we invest into young South Africans being able to be part of a bigger continental and international community within the climate space, the climate discussions, within advocacy, within campaigning, we're going to drive an agenda which is potentially a bit limiting in terms of youth voices into climate policy space. Us currently and future generations are really going to have to grapple with global climate migration, with global issues that impact locally, and therefore that kind of thinking needs to be part of where young South Africans wanting to influence policy are influencing policy in a way that it is cognizant of this much bigger issue, a global issue. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure that I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. And you mentioned that the youth need to have a influential role of contextualizing our climate crisis issues. Can you speak to perhaps how you've seen that happen, and whether you've seen that move from the youth calling for a shift, and I mean calling for contextualizing global issues, and then having that call translated into a policy level? Is that something that you've seen, or would you say that that is something that's still lacking and perhaps needs a bit of more work?
Onke, no, I don't think we've really seen that, but I think we're seeing the process towards that becoming stronger and stronger in South Africa. I think, and it links back to the question around tokenism. When I was young and fighting for youth rights, a youth voice in the decision-making space, I think there was a hell of a lot more tokenism than there is now. Just having youth in the room seemed to suffice back then. Whereas now, having youth in the room and really listening to what's coming through from younger, creative, innovative minds is very real. So I think that youth influencing policy going forward and really shaping policy going forward is going to become stronger and stronger and of more value. But I think we're in a process. That's my opinion. I can't think of examples where youth have dramatically had their voice amplified to a point where policy is really reflecting that, at least around the climate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but Hlengiwe, if you forgive me, I just want to squeeze in one more question from the youth to just send out a message of inspiration about the work that you do in informing, you know, climate policy, or, you know, instill some sort of hope. Like Mike said, it's shifted quite a bit from tokenism and just being in the room to the youth of today being listened to. So maybe we'll start with Kopano and Tandile, maybe if you can jump in and keep it really short. Okay. Okay, so we just, okay, we'll save it for the Q&A. Okay, so I don't know if anybody in the room or online has any questions for any of our panelists. Yes, Mbali.
So this question comes from Melissa Fori, and she says, one of the superpowers of the youth in the movement for climate action and climate justice is that young people are less invested in maintaining the status quo and are more open to radical change. And radical change is what is needed in this decade, where we have to halve global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And to do this in a way that addresses inequality, poverty, and unemployment. How can we harness the superpower of young people to catalyze the radical change we all need?
Shall we take a few questions and then maybe the panelists can decide who answers?
Online, please raise your hand. We'll take 2 hands online.
Okay, I have a question for Kopano. I really appreciate that you highlighted the work that Khansa is doing to spotlight or highlight youth in the climate space in general. So my question for you is, from your experience, where and how do policymakers make space for youth engagement? And what are the challenges or any barriers?
I will take 2 hands online. If this time, we'll come back again.
Gabriel, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you so much for the deep conversation that we're having today. I think it's so crucial, especially when we talk about building and growing together toward this just future that I know we all deserve and we want. I suppose my question, and it can be to anybody in the room, is more just how do we justify wanting youth or younger people, shall I say? How do we justify wanting younger people to be more organized and take the lead and pull themselves together when there aren't any support structures in place that are meaningfully holding that space? I suppose it's a bit contradictory to say organize yourself, but we don't have the tools, because many young people, a part of the movement, are either freshly out of high school, in high school, or haven't even gone to high school and had access to that level of education. So I suppose that's my question to the space. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Gabriel. Innocent? Innocent, we don't seem to have sound from your end. Please type the question and back to the moderator.
Sure, thank you so much, everyone, for those questions. There was the first question about, from Melissa Fori. Perhaps you would like to answer your colleague, Deepak?
I think Melissa's was more a comment than a question, firstly. Younger people do have less vested interest in the system as it currently exists. And earlier I talked about a theory of change. And, you know, you get and we in the old days used to have, do you get change from acting within or without? And I think it's a combination of the two. So one can't just have a, let's just say, generalized orientation to where the impact needs to be effected for change to take place. So at a personal level, and I don't profess this to be a PCC approach on this question, at a personal level, I think we have to act on all sides. And so there needs to be a voice for transformation from within. And some of us hope that we might straddle, and the PCC certainly straddles that space where what we say needs to be taken seriously, but we are not really part of the establishment, on the other hand. So we do have an interesting position where we can find, if necessary, the reconciliation between the external radical voice, if there is such a thing, and the internal motive forces for change and transformation. And it's when these things come together that I think we have a really powerful, concerted unity behind the need to transform. I don't think there's anyone in the world today who is rational, thoughtful, based on some level of scientific understanding, that we need to act, and we need to act urgently when it comes to climate change response. And so we do have a burning platform. We need to find our respective individual and organizational places of impact as we work out what we individually and collectively decide we want to use. In my case, the remaining years and energy that is left. In majority of your case, the rest of your lives that is left.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Kopano, perhaps you want to take the question that was, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Madiahi. I think from my experience, what I've seen come out of, I guess, effective youth engagement would be the leveraging that government has done with youth constituencies, such as Youth at Saya. I'm speaking merely from experience here. I know that there are other civil society organizations, that have also benefited from government relations. But these are also avenues that have created ways in which we young people can get involved in policymaking processes, not just at a national level, but also at a global level, right? And you've got constituencies such as, Yango, Khoi, the International Youth Climate Delegate Program, which also you and I are part of right now, which offers, a different avenue into policy spaces, either, in relation to government or as an individual person within the climate space. And I think some of the barriers that I think I might have encountered would be that the policies need to be kind of youth-led. We've seen the successes come from, the South African Youth Climate Action Plan, which was for the youth by the youth. Yes, it was facilitated by Youth at Saya, but at the same time, that was a youth-based, document similar to the climate action accountability project that you guys have just launched today. And I think, the policies need to be youth-based and also show accountability. I think, those are, and also intersectional. In the engagement with youth, with young people, I think it's very vital for government stakeholders, to showcase how intersectional the climate crisis is. It's not separate from food and agriculture. It's not separate from the socioeconomic challenges that we're facing, and it's so difficult to kind of, relate to that when you put climate at such a, to the side, and you decide to, you expect that the socioeconomic issues will be salvaged on their own. I'm hoping that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kopano. We did have a question from Gabriel Clausen online as well. Perhaps we can throw this one to Mike, if he's still with us. Gabriel asked how the youth can be supported in their campaign in calling for climate action. Mike, can you perhaps take that one?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the question around resources and lack of resources that was raised is quite critical, because one of the keystones to having a voice within climate policy is access to resources, is tangible support that fosters an environment where youth are encouraged and enabled to participate in the climate space. So centered in terms of what youth can do is, youth movements are incredibly powerful. There was the question around, are youth marginalized or not? How do we get youth to be listened to more carefully? And if youth mobilize themselves as a movement, then it's very difficult to ignore that voice that comes through. And we're seeing more and more youth entities. So the African Climate Alliance is an example I like to reflect on, where multiple perspectives and young voices are coming together and really addressing pressure points to be heard. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I answered your question, Gabriel, but it's kind of where my thinking was going.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Mike. Tandile, you've raised your hand.
Yes, I'd like to speak to Gabe's point. I think it's a very crucial question that they've posed, and it's something that it's important for us to be cognizant of, especially in this space. It isn't particularly a fair trade-off that we're expecting the youth to make. I think there are a myriad of competing interests and priorities that the youth have, particularly around the issue of unemployment at this time. And so it is not a fair request that they mobilize themselves, particularly without those resources available to them. And when we've done maybe such a poor job in terms of capacitating them with what they need. And I think to maybe piggyback on what some of the previous panelists have mentioned, it's so important that we ensure that we are equipping the youth with the civic education that engage in these platforms. You know, we're aware that there are policy makers at national and provincial legislatures that hold forums and platforms for the youth to engage. And these need to be communicated widely enough where the youth are, as they're not necessarily getting access to the communications about these forums being held. We need to make sure that we meet them where they are, that we meet them with where their key priorities are. Because if you're still struggling to make ends meet, to provide for yourself and your families, it will be challenging to ask that you mobilize around these civil issues and are able to mobilize on these issues. And I think as well, just from an education level, it's so important that we are integrating practical examples of civic engagement and how people could potentially engage in that more earnestly in our education system. Just reflecting briefly on my formative education, which is relatively recent, there was not really a focus on some of those aspects. We would have bake sales, which would teach us, you know, the principles of economics, entrepreneurship, capitalism. But when it came to civic engagement, there was very little practical examples. We were not necessarily writing letters to our local officials or attending marches. And this is something that we need to ensure that our education system is reflecting on, and that we are not only capacitating the youth in terms of education, but in terms of when they need to enter these spaces, as we've mentioned, these global spaces like COP, that it's not prohibitively expensive for them to do so, that they're able to be funded by the government to be able to enter those spaces, and that they're supported and encouraged by their government to do so. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tandile. I'm pretty sure that, Gabriel, your question has been well answered. Dora, you have your hand up?
I have my hand up, yeah, because I wanted to talk about on the support of the youth and the importance. I think there is a huge need for all of us, and I mean both governments, civil society, and academic institutions, and all of society to really support the youth. I want to give you a short story. So about beginning of May, we were running a councillor induction program for the municipalities in Gauteng. And as we were interacting during the break, I got approached by someone that at the time it was a very young person in Soweto, as we were mobilizing when I was part of Life Africa and Gender CC at the time, just really raising awareness and mobilizing, and youth were participating in the marches and things like that. He just came to me and said, "Can you remember me?" And I looked at him and said, "Yeah, your face looks familiar." And he said, "It's because of those years that your organizations and yourselves really invested in the youth at the time of Soweto around the issues of climate change, that today I am a councillor that is focusing on the issues of environment. And I believe that it was during those formative years that I managed to be able to grasp this and fell in love with it." And he was sitting on the other end, I was sitting on the other end, really holding I think the local government accountable and asking the right questions. And I think you never know what will happen, because one of the things that we really want to encourage is that, the youth eventually should be able to lead. And as Deepak has said, they're not going to be the youth forever. They will grow up to become citizens of this country. And governance is just one such important issue, and particularly environmental governance. And if we can invest our resources to the young people, and they may just one day appear just like the gentleman Ahmed, whom I only could recall in some of the workshops that we ran about 15 years ago. So it's just, for me, it was a heartwarming story that started with this young man. He developed such passion and such interest for issues of environment, but also learning how to hold government accountable to an extent where he put up himself to serve at the city of Johannesburg Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, and I think bringing about that little bit of hope that I thought we had time to share. So thank you for that. I don't know if we have any more questions. Do we have time? We don't have time. Sorry. Yeah, perhaps you can maybe catch one of the panelists afterwards and get them to answer your question. Sorry about that. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope that it's been a meaningful discussion and that you have taken away some pointers and have found some people to approach for those of you that still want to further engage in the space. I'm very glad that there's both generations here, and I hope that the youth have taken some notes from the older generation, and the older generation has taken some notes from the younger ones. And then we're actually going to see this dialogue transform into climate policy action, and see an intergenerational approach in that. So yeah, thank you so much to our lovely panelists for all your contributions and your efforts. And thank you so much to everyone for joining and attending and being so engaging. Yeah, have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much. Earlier I was saying I hope the people online are also going, yes, and I've been seeing the ums and yes online, so which is great, and I'm loving it. I think while my next person comes up, I just wanted to say the one thing that I think we hope that you can take forward, and I am suggesting this with the PCC, is that we hope that let's create a database that every department, national department, can go to the PCC when they want to engage a youth on something. They can fund it to the PCC. And I hope that the young people online, please share your contact details, please share your organizations that you are associated with, so that you can start to create this database to ensure that when national departments have dialogues, they can't have an excuse to say we didn't have young people to talk to. So before Ayaka joins us for closing remarks, we have some exciting news that we wanted to share, and I'm going to hand over to Ivana to share those news.
Hi, everyone. So you've heard a lot about the YCC program, the Youth Climate Champions program today. And so today we are opening applications for our second annual Youth Climate Champions Bootcamp. The purpose of this bootcamp is to capacitate young people to engage in climate policy processes, so everything we've been discussing today. The bootcamp is a 2-week intensive program with a preparatory online week and then a 5-day in-person program hosted at a venue in Gauteng. The event is fully funded and applications are open to people between the ages of 18 and 30. This is really an incredible event, and I'm sure some of those in the audience can attest to that as being part of our first amazing cohort from the bootcamp we hosted last year. Those who are online can follow the link that I think has just been shared and apply there. You can also find the application form at any of WWF SA's social media accounts, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Yeah, please apply, share the application with people you think might be interested in it. It's a fantastic, fantastic opportunity. Thank you.
And in closing, yes, you can come and present. You can come and present in the space. In closing, before I hand over to Ayaka, I wanted to say thank you to the team. This event was organized by young people, both under the YCC and also at the PCC. So thank you so much to the team at PCC. And Tabiseng and Ignatius, and thank you to my team, Ivana, Mudiehi, Pato, who you had speaking online but didn't introduce herself, Yasira at the back, Zikona and Lebohang. So thank you so much to all the team members that put this together. I really appreciate it. And over to you, Ayaka, for the closing remarks. And after this, this is my last opportunity. I'm Hlengiwe Radebe. Thank you for allowing me thank you for allowing me to hold the space today. Thank you so much.
Wow, so I think we can all agree that this is what a meaningful youth engagement looks like, where young people dominate the space, where there are people that are willing to listen to us and be on our side, where there are young people online that are able to engage with us. So I definitely think that today's mission was achieved. And for me, when I look at this event and what happened today, I'm very, very appreciative of the young people that put in the effort to actually compile this document, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. I know from experience that you have probably faced a lot of hiccups, so you wonder, is this good enough? Is there sound backing to this? Are people going to receive this well? Is it going to go anywhere? Or even if it's going to get published at all? So for the fact that you guys stuck it out and you knew this is what you wanted to achieve is quite amazing to me personally. And as a young person that grew in her activism through youth organizations, civil society organizations, there's no secret that we are actively doing what we say. Because a lot of times as young people, we're perceived to only be complaining, we only come with problems, we don't come with solutions. But through this meeting or engagement that we've had here today, we can firmly say that we are past that phase now. We are actively the young people that come with problems and solutions to those problems. And we are the ones that spearhead those solutions. We don't just hand it over to an older person to solve it, but we are the ones that want to be actively engaged in that process from start to finish. I would like to say thank you to the PCC team. Even though we have our grievances with the PCC and sometimes how they organize young people and whether engagements are meaningful or not, we cannot deny the impact that it's had on South Africa. And from what I've experienced in the PCC, I came in here very hot-headed, very against this process. I was like, I'm gonna make some noise. But through seeing the leadership in the PCC and the strong secretariat behind it, it's really given me hope that, you know what, if I sit quiet in a meeting, there's no stress, the PCC has got me. Because through the work that the PCC has done, we've seen young people become more confident in spaces like these. You know, we don't get a lot of spaces like this. And for the fact that we can just call the PCC and say like, hey, we have a document, you want to launch it? Can we partner up? And the PCC is willing to meet us with so much enthusiasm. And just willingness to help is quite a blessing in the time that we are in. So yes, we might not be where we want to be, but we have definitely stepped in the right direction. And there's a lot of momentum growing on the ground. Young people are stronger than ever, in my opinion. And as the young people that are in this room, it is our responsibility to take along the people that are not as educated in this field as we are. And honestly, I feel like our future is in good hands. Don't you think so? Yeah, it is, right? Because if organizations, youth organizations and civil society organizations, as I believe you guys are from, can create such an impact, imagine what more we can do when climate change, climate justice, climate literacy is introduced to our schools at all levels. So I firmly think that we're stepping in the right direction. Once again, thank you for everyone that came out today to support this initiative. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to everyone in this room, because no one forced us to be here, but we're out here because we want this willingness. We have this willingness to create and affect change. So thank you once again to the PCC team, to the YCC team, and everyone that was responsible for putting this event together. I'm sure as young people, we can agree when we say we really appreciate spaces like this, and onwards and forwards to them.
Yeah, that's the end of our discussion today, our intergenerational dialogue. So thank you, and thank you, Onke, for holding this space. And I forgot Charmaine, thank you for also being part of the team. Thank you so much, everyone. And goodbye, everyone online.